There are already plenty of films about Caerlaverock Castle, the sieges, Edward I turning up with an army, and the famous poem written about what happened here. I'm not making that film, because once you get past the familiar history, Caerlaverock is full of things that don't quite add up. Someone came here in the 13th century and decided to build a triangular castle, something nobody else in Britain seems to have tried. The Maxwells had already built another castle nearby, spent years improving it, and then abandoned it after less than 50 years. And somewhere along the way, somebody living here got their hands on a beautiful Islamic glass beaker, made thousands of miles away in medieval Middle East. Those are the stories I want to know, and the triangle seems the obvious place to begin. By the late 1200s, castle builders knew their trade. Their tools were simple: lines, compasses, wooden squares, but in skilled hands they could set out enormous buildings with remarkable accuracy. Caerlaverock gave them a rather different problem. Whoever designed it had settled on 3 sides, and once that decision was made, everyone else had to make it work. The square in a mason's hand was still useful, of course, but it was no longer going to settle every argument, and the ground wasn't helping. The Great Northern Gatehouse had solid bedrock beneath it. Behind that, the land fell away. There was an obvious solution: change the building to suit the site. They changed the site. Ground was raised beneath much of the castle until the plan could be built as intended. The triangle, it seems, was not up for negotiation. The marshy landscape does not explain some of the thinking. In the 13th century, the easiest approach was from the north, and that is exactly where Caerlaverock put its greatest strength. The twin-towered gatehouse dominates that side of the castle. Anyone arriving by the sensible route came directly towards it. That explains the gatehouse. It doesn't quite explain the triangle. Plenty of medieval castles dealt with awkward approaches without resorting to 3 sides, so whoever drew this plan was doing something unusually ambitious. His name hasn't survived. The men laying the stones knew who he was. The Maxwells who were praying for all this certainly did, yet somewhere over the following centuries, the identity of the man responsible for one of Britain's most distinctive castles simply disappeared. His ideas are easier to trace. Architects elsewhere were experimenting with geometry too. Holt Castle in Wales was pentagonal. Castel del Monte in southern Italy turned the octagon into almost an obsession. Rhuddlan Castle was taking shape in Wales at around the same time as Caerlaverock. So this anonymous designer was not working in some isolated corner of Scotland, inventing peculiar shapes for his own amusement. Perhaps there was a little of that. Archaeologists have described Caerlaverock as showing a pleasure in geometry. It is a wonderful phrase. For all the practical problems this design created, somebody clearly thought the result was worth the trouble. And it was noticed. Around 20 years later, a poet travelling with Edward's army described Caerlaverock as being shaped like a shield, with 3 sides and a tower at each corner. If they'd had a bird's eye view, they may have seen that sword too. Whether a shield was ever part of the original idea has disappeared along with the architect. But by 1300, the shape was distinctive enough to end up in verse. Before the triangular castle existed, the Maxwells had already built another Caerlaverock. It stood barely 200 metres away. Over the following decades, they kept expanding it. The earliest hall was timber, that was replaced with stone, followed by an enclosure wall and projecting corner towers. This was not a temporary camp thrown up and forgotten. It was a site of continuous investment. Then less than 50 years after it was founded, they walked away. 3-ring dating of the timber bridges tells the story. Oak felled for the first castle's crossing dates to around 1229. By roughly 1277, fresh wood was being cut for the bridge at the new site. For a stronghold still actively developing, that is an extraordinarily brief tenure. The earth beneath it provides the first clue. Built on heavy clay, the masonry shows clear signs of subsidence. Those later corner towers may have served a dual purpose, not just strengthening the defences, but shoring up walls that were quietly sliding. While the family was improving the architecture above ground, the ground itself was failing. Naturally, the Solway offered a more dramatic culprit. This coast is notorious for violent storm surges, capable of pushing seawater inland and rewriting the shoreline overnight. A major flood driving the family out would make a neat, catastrophic explanation. Researchers went looking for it. They had found traces that the sea had reached the site, but the definitive evidence for a major storm surge dated after the Maxwells had already left. There was no single cataclysmic flood. Reality was likely more slow and more tedious. A wall shifts and requires constant attention. Another section fractures. The mud remains wet, heavy and unyielding. Eventually, starting over a short distance away makes more practical sense than endlessly repairing what is sinking. Whatever finally tipped the balance, the family did not retreat to a safe, dry hill miles inland. They began again, barely 200 metres away, locked into the exact same difficult landscape, but with a radically different design in hand. The First Caerlaverock dissolved into the marsh. Centuries later, archaeologists sifting through the floor of its abandoned hall found something left behind by one of the final occupants. 3 fragments of a glass beaker. Unlike the Maxwells, the glass had travelled an extraordinary distance to reach Solway. The fragments came from an Islamic glass beaker, made sometime in the 12th or 13th century, probably in Syria, Iraq or Egypt. Even broken, enough survives to show you that this was no ordinary drinking cup. The glass carried Arabic decoration, traces of red colouring and gilding. On the largest fragment, part of a single word can still be read: eternal. Somehow, this delicate and expensive object had made its way from the medieval Islamic world to a castle on the edge of Solway. Trade may be the simplest explanation. Goods were travelling vast distances in the Middle Ages, passing from merchant to merchant and port to port, until the person who finally bought them might have had a little idea where the journey began. But there's another possibility. Someone connected with Caerlaverock may have brought it home from the Crusades. For however long the beaker survived intact, someone here used it. Among the timber walls, wet ground and stone walls from the First Caerlaverock, a vessel made perhaps thousands of miles away was being picked up, filled and passed around. And that changes the scale of the place. The Maxwells may have lived on the edge of Scotland, but they were not living at the edge of the medieval world. Objects, fashions and ideas were moving across immense distances, and somehow one of them finished its journey here, shattering quietly in the mud. Whoever owned that beaker disappeared without having an explanation for how it reached Solway. 3 centuries later, another man living here went to rather great lengths to make sure his story wasn't lost. His name was Robert Maxwell, and he wrote parts of his life across the front of his own house without using a single word. Robert Maxwell's Caerlaverock was a very different place from the medieval fortress his ancestors had known. In the 1630s, he built an if-style lodging inside the courtyard, turning part of the old stronghold into a fashionable and exceptionally comfortable house. He did not go for understatement. The facade was covered in elaborate carvings, and likely brightly painted. Among the standard family heraldry and decoration sat figures from Greek mythology. That in itself is fashionable enough for the period. The specific figures Robert chose, however, are where it becomes personal. One depicts Patroclus, the fallen companion of Achilles, his body exposed and torn at after death. Robert's own father had suffered a grimly similar indignity, following his death during a bitter feud with the Johnstons. His body remained unburied for years. Nearby is Prometheus, chained and punished for defying authority. Robert had spent his years in prison for his Catholic faith. Neither carving comes with a written explanation, so absolute certainty remains out of reach. But the parallels are difficult to dismiss. A son whose father was denied a proper resting place chooses the story of an unburied warrior. A man who knew long confinement chooses Prometheus in irons. And there is a subtle anomaly in the stone. The carving was copied from an existing printed illustration, yet the mason changed a key detail, a bird is pecking directly at the chain. That element was not in the original. Whether Robert intended it as a quiet symbol of release, endurance, or defiance is lost with him. The physical monument, however, had a short life. Only a few years after the lodging was completed, Caerlaverock was under siege again. In 1640, Covenanter forces surrounded the castle, and the garrison held out for 13 weeks before surrendering. Once inside, the victors deliberately dismantled the south wall, the very wall bearing Robert's carvings of unburied bodies and heavy chains, so that the fortress could never be held again. Robert had spent years turning a ruinous border castle into a grand home, encoding his private suffering into the walls. Almost as soon as he finished, war came back and tore it down. After the siege of 1640, Caerlaverock never really became a family home again. The Maxwells moved on, roofs disappeared, rooms opened to the weather, and slowly the castle became the ruin we know today. We lost the name of the man who designed the triangle, but his idea remains embedded in the landscape. The first castle nearly vanished altogether, yet 3 small fragments of that Islamic glass still waited in the floor of its abandoned hall. And Robert Maxwell never explained the carvings on his new house. We are left to wonder whether he was simply following Renaissance fashion or spelling out his own survival. This is what makes Caerlaverock compelling. We can map out why the triangle worked structurally, yet the core choice behind it remains entirely unexplained. We know the Maxwells abandoned their first site, but the precise tipping point is lost in the mud. An exotic glass beaker reached the Solway, yet the person who carried it here is a ghost. And while Robert Maxwell's life reads clearly enough in his stonework, certainty about his intent is something we will never quite possess. It is the quiet questions left behind that make the place endure.